November 1347. A chill wind blew across the docks of the Sicilian port of Messina. Ships had arrived from the eastern Mediterranean, their hulls heavy with grain, cloth, and other goods. Yet something invisible traveled with them, something far deadlier than any sword or catapult. Rats scuttled among the cargo, their fur matted with fleas carrying the deadly Yersinia pestis bacterium. No one on the docks suspected that these seemingly ordinary vessels would soon ignite one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. By the time the Black Death had run its course in 1351, an estimated 25 to 50 million Europeans, nearly half the population, would lie dead, leaving a continent transformed socially, economically, and culturally. Europe in the mid-14th century was a land of contrasts. Kingdoms were recovering from decades of political turmoil, intermittent warfare, and economic strain. France and England had been locked in a simmering conflict that would soon escalate into the 100 Years' War. The Holy Roman Empire struggled with fragmented authority, while the papacy, recently returned from Avignon to Rome, sought to assert spiritual and temporal influence over monarchs. Cities like Florence, Paris, and London were bustling centers of trade and craftsmanship. Streets crowded with merchants, apprentices, and laborers echoed with the sounds of commerce, the stamping of hooves on cobblestones, haggling voices, and the clatter of wheels against stone. Life was vibrant, yet precarious. Malnutrition, poor sanitation, and the pressures of urban density made populations vulnerable to disease. Into this world came the plague. Its arrival was swift and merciless. In Sicily, townspeople first noticed a mysterious fever. Black swellings, buboes appeared in the groin, armpits, and neck. Soon, the afflicted became listless, coughing blood, vomiting, and bleeding from every orifice. Within days, death followed. Survivors fled to the countryside, hoping that open air and distance would shield them. But the rats followed, and the fleas continued to transmit the disease. From Sicily, the contagion spread across Italy, along trade routes connecting Venice, Genoa, Florence, and beyond. Within months, it had crossed the Alps, reaching France, Spain, and the Low Countries. By 1348, England was facing its own nightmare, as the plague entered through the ports of Dorset and Kent. Among the human toll, countless stories emerged. In Florence, chronicler Giovanni Boccaccio recorded streets where corpses were left unburied, abandoned by family members too fearful to approach. Children wandered alone, parents dead or sick, scavenging for food amid the decaying remnants of households. In Paris, overcrowded hospitals overflowed. Priests administered last rites while themselves succumbing. Wealth offered little protection. Merchants, nobles, and even clergy fell victim to the invisible enemy. Meanwhile, charlatans and self-proclaimed healers peddled dubious remedies. Bloodletting, incense, and prayers offered comfort but not survival. Social upheaval followed as fear gripped the populace. Entire villages vanished from the map, while towns struggled to maintain order. Labor became scarce as farmers, blacksmiths, and craftsmen died, leading to rising wages and newfound bargaining power for survivors. The traditional feudal hierarchy, long unchallenged, began to erode as economic necessity demanded flexibility. Peasants left the manors in search of safer, better-paid work. Landowners faced declining rents, while cities experienced both depopulation and opportunity. In Venice, shipbuilding and trade continued, yet merchant families paid dearly as the plague claimed heirs and apprentices alike. Religious life was deeply affected. The church attempted to interpret the catastrophe as divine punishment for sin, prompting fervent acts of penance and processions through towns. The flagellants, groups of penitents publicly whipping themselves, moved across northern Italy, France, and Germany. Their cries and blood-streaked bodies were both a plea and a warning. Yet even as the faithful sought to appease God, clergy were disproportionately affected, leaving many parishes without priests. Some towns appointed children or elderly men to perform sacraments. The papacy struggled to maintain authority and credibility amid widespread death and uncertainty. Economically, the plague reshaped Europe. Agricultural lands lay fallow, vineyards rotted, and mills stood idle. And yet the reduction in population meant that surviving laborers could demand higher wages. Cities experienced inflation in some sectors but scarcity in others. Trade routes, once vibrant, faced disruption as merchants feared contagion. Ports imposed quarantines. Ships from plague-stricken areas were left waiting offshore for weeks, sometimes months. Genoa, Venice, and Marseille became early examples of organized public health measures, establishing isolation procedures to slow the disease's spread. These measures, rudimentary by modern standards, marked the beginning of a European awareness that commerce and health could not be separated. The Black Death was not uniform in its impact. Some regions, such as parts of Poland and Hungary, experienced lower mortality, possibly due to geographic isolation or lower population density. Conversely, cities like Florence, London, and Paris faced catastrophic mortality, sometimes reaching 60 to 70% of the population. Entire monastic communities vanished, castles and towns were deserted, and estates became ghostly reminders of a once thriving civilization. Families lost not only lives, but also property, titles, and social standing. Women, often widowed, took on unprecedented responsibilities, managing estates and households in the absence of men. This subtle shift in gender dynamics had long-term societal implications. Cultural reactions were profound. Art and literature reflected preoccupation with death and the transience of life. The danse macabre motif emerged, portraying skeletons leading the living to their graves, reminding communities of mortality's inevitability. Chroniclers, painters, and writers documented the horror and resilience of humanity. Even science and medicine, previously constrained by tradition, began to question assumptions about disease, contagion, and human anatomy, laying groundwork for future inquiry. Globally, the Black Death demonstrated the interconnectedness of the medieval world. Originating in Central Asia, likely from plague-infected rodents along trade routes, it traveled through the Black Sea, Mediterranean ports, and overland to reach northern Europe. China, the Middle East, and North Africa also experienced waves of devastation, highlighting the vulnerabilities inherent in global commerce, urbanization, and migration. The pandemic reshaped population patterns, trade networks, and political priorities across continents. European expansion, colonization, and demographic trends in subsequent centuries were influenced, in part, by the massive depopulation caused by the plague. By 1351, the initial wave had subsided, leaving a Europe transformed. Entire communities had disappeared. The labor market had shifted in favor of the working class, and social mobility, previously constrained, began to accelerate. Agricultural practices evolved as fewer hands meant innovations in tools and techniques. Urban centers rebuilt with attention to sanitation and infrastructure. The collective trauma left an enduring imprint on the European psyche. Fear of contagion, a fascination with death, and an understanding that human life, though fragile, was capable of adaptation and endurance. Standing in the streets of Paris or Florence post-plague, one would witness a city simultaneously scarred and resilient. Buildings reconstructed, trade cautiously resuming, markets buzzing once again. Yet the memory of emptiness lingered. Graves left unfilled, families erased, and streets once crowded now punctuated with silence. Artists and chroniclers ensured that the horror was not forgotten. Philosophers and theologians debated morality, providence, and human destiny. The Black Death had forced humanity to confront mortality on an unprecedented scale, prompting social, economic, and cultural transformations that would resonate for generations. The legacy of the Black Death is multidimensional. It accelerated shifts in labor and economy, weakened feudal structures, challenged religious authority, influenced art, literature, and medicine. It demonstrated the fragility of human societies in the face of disease, but also the capacity for resilience and adaptation. The pandemic underscored the interconnectivity of the medieval world and revealed how local outbreaks could ripple across continents. Though horrific in its immediate toll, it reshaped the trajectory of European civilization, laying foundations for modern economic, social, and cultural systems. As we look back at Europe from 1347 to 1351, the landscape is unrecognizable to those who had walked it before. Fields left untended, villages deserted, cities transformed by loss and recovery. The rhythm of life had been interrupted, but not extinguished. Humanity endured, adapted, and in the ashes of tragedy found the seeds of renewal. The Black Death was more than a plague. It was a catalyst, a turning point that forced societies to rethink labor, trade, faith, and survival itself. From the chaos and horror emerged a Europe more aware, more resilient, and forever changed.